I'm Chris Driver, I'm a surgeon who works at the Children's Hospital in Aberdeen, and I'm going to talk to you today about stomas. Chances are, if you're watching this, that your doctor or nurse has been talking to you about the possibility of having a stoma. So what I thought we'd do is just take you through a bit of what the usual arrangement of all the bowels are, and then we can have a look about the different sorts of stomas and what you might expect. I've got my good friends Buttony Bears here, who are going to watch and keep an eye and make sure we do it all right. So this is a special apron that we've got on that shows us exactly what the arrangements are for inside the bowels. This is the arrangements of your bowel. So if we look at this, we've got a stomach that comes down here, and then it comes into this bit down here, which is your small bowel, and the poo in there is all very runny. And down in this side here, you get to something called your cecum, and normally your appendix sits just here. And then your bowel around the outside here is called your colon, or your large bowel. And this goes all the way down to your rectum and your bottom. So what normally happens is you eat something and it comes down your gullet, it mixes in your stomach, goes through your small bowel, all the water's sucked out in the large bowel, and then it comes out as poo at the bottom. So that's what happens when everything's joined up. Now, if you're going to have a stoma, there's lots of different names that people use for it. They can be called stomas, they can be called side passages, they can be called having a bag, and there's two main different types that we're going to talk about. The first one is an ileostomy, where we bring out something from the small bowel, and the second one is a colostomy, where we bring out something from the large bowel. So if we look at an ileostomy first, what happens with an ileostomy is that your surgeon will do an operation on your tummy, and then will separate the bowel where it joins the colon. So somewhere down the bottom here, where the ileum joins the large bowel, he'll do an operation to separate that. And that leaves you with one end that sticks, that's going to drain the poo, and the other end that's a blind end. Now, depending on why you're having the operation, sometimes your surgeon will take away the colon, or sometimes they'll leave it there. So when you've had an ileostomy, what happens is that your surgeon brings it through onto the tummy, and it'll come out as a side passage or an ileostomy, and it'll looks a bit pink and it'll stick out a bit. And it's quite important that ileostomies stick out a bit, because the poo that comes out of there can be quite sore on your skin. So it's much better if it sticks out a bit, so that when you put the bag on, it drains into the bag and doesn't drain your skin. Now, sometimes with an ileostomy, your surgeon might bring out the other end as a blind end. A blind end of your bowel called a mucus fistula. That's usually much smaller. So this is your ileostomy. What happens is the poo in here tends to be quite runny, and you often need to change the bag sometimes a bit more often initially. It will change a bit, it tends to mature over time. The colour changes a little bit, and it gets a little bit easier to use as you get more experience with it. So that's an ileostomy. So the other operation you might need is a colostomy. If the problem's much further down, or you just want to protect the very bottom of the bowel, and sometimes we'll bring out a colostomy. And quite often these are just temporary, so they're not a permanent thing, but it's just something you'll have for a few weeks or a few months. So if you have a colostomy, what happens then is the surgeon will divide the bowel somewhere along the colon. Now, it can be a number of different places depending on what type of operation you've had. Sometimes it's divided in the middle here. And you bring it out in the middle of the transverse colon. That's usually just if it's going to be a temporary stoma. Or sometimes you bring it down further down at the bottom here. Now, when you have a colostomy, it's exactly the same thing. One end will come up through the tummy wall and come out as a stoma there, and quite often again the other end will come out as a mucus fistula. It'll just be sitting at the bottom. So you may end up with two stomas, but usually you only have a bag on one of them. A lot of adults who have colostomy, the colostomy is fairly flush with the skin. When we're doing them in children, we tend to bring them out a little bit again, so they spout a little bit. And the reason for that again is just to make putting the bags on a bit easier and help to keep the poo in the bag and off the skin. When you've got a colostomy, the poo, because the poo's been through the colon and all the water's been sucked out, it's usually a bit firmer. It looks a bit more like normal poo. So you don't have to change the bag quite so often. When you want to come and join them back up again, it's a very straightforward procedure. Your surgeon just makes an operation around the stoma, drops it back in, does the same for your mucus fistula and drops it back in, and then can stitch it back together again and join everything up. So stomas can be permanent. In some situations you're going to have them forever, but most stomas in children, there's a fairly good chance that you'll be able to reverse them and put everything back to normal. Just leaves you with some scars, but quite often you can put them back so you can poo normally at some stage. And that's stomas for you. Everyone gets a bit anxious about the thought of them. Mum and Dad get quite worried about them. You'll be quite worried about having one as well. But they just take a bit of getting used to. And hopefully, now you understand a bit more about what they are, they won't be quite as scary. Good luck.